What is a logarithm? Close, not opposite, but starts with an I. Inverse, yes. Right idea. It is the inverse of an exponential function. So why do we have them? Does anybody know why we even bother having logarithms, other than the fact that they're a giant pain in the rear?
Yeah, I don't know.
This is how we can get an exponent isolated. They allow us to solve problems where the exponent is the unknown thing. Definition of a logarithm. Definition of a logarithmic function. If b to the power of e equals a, then the log base b of a is equal to e. Logarithms are defined based on their relationship to an exponential function. E is the exponent from the exponential function. What do you guys think the b stands for? Base. A stands for argument. So we have our base, we have our argument, and we have our exponent. Domain and range are flipped from our exponential functions. So our domain is going to be from h to infinity. Or if we've been reflected, it could be from negative infinity to h. So for the parents, that would be from 0 to infinity. The range, though, what's the domain for exponentials? What's the domain for exponential functions? Negative infinity to positive infinity. So what would the range be here? Negative infinity to positive infinity. Because it is the inverse. That's for all of them. We have a common point again. It's going to be a 0. So for the parent, that is going to be 1, 0. And then I have a typo on the next line. This should say a logarithmic function, not an exponential function. Exponential functions have a horizontal asymptote, right? So logarithms would have a vertical asymptote. All right, just in purple. That will be at x equals h. So that would be x equals 0 for the parent. And the last thing I want to get written down, part E, the base and the argument of a logarithmic function must always, always, always be positive. Always. Always. So you can go ahead and put the notes away. We'll finish up the rest of this when we come back. We've got just a couple little things to write down, and then we'll dig right into the problems. While you guys are packing your stuff up, though, I like to tell some funny stories about the guy that created logarithms. His name was John Napier. He was a 15th or 16th century English nobleman. He was brilliant. And brilliant people of that time often got accused of witchcraft. Smart people were not to be trusted. He was kind of tricky, too. So one of the stories that I like to tell about him, he had a neighbor who kept poultry, chickens, turkeys, other types of birds and whatnot. And the neighbor would let his birds out, and they would come over to John Napier's land, and they would eat the grain that he had out for his own birds. And John went over to his neighbor's place, talked to him several times, like, dude, you got to keep your birds on your own property. And the neighbor's like, whatever. Kept doing it. John goes over there finally, he's like, look, if you don't keep your birds on your own property, they're going to be mine. I'm feeding them. They're going to become mine. I'll collect them. The neighbor laughed at him. He's like, good luck with that. So he's like, all right. He goes home. He takes large bags of barley, a grain, soaks them in barrels of brandy, gets up the next morning, and spreads this grain out on the ground. Neighbor lets his birds out. What do you think the birds do? They eat the brandy-soaked grain. They eat a lot of it. These birds got drunk and started falling down. So then he sent his staff out, and they picked them all up and put them in a bag. There was another time that he caught one of his staff that had been stealing from him. He didn't know who it was. He just knew somebody on his staff was stealing. His staff was terrified of him. Not because he was mean, but he was this weird guy. And so he told them that he had a chicken that could detect lies. And he told them that each of his staff, because he was going to find the one that was stealing from him, they had to go into a room with this black rooster that he had. They had to put their hands on the rooster and talk with the rooster, and then he would go in afterwards, and the rooster would tell him whether or not they were lying. He coated this black rooster in soot. So they'd go in, they'd put their hands on the rooster, they'd explain to the rooster that they weren't the one that was stealing. What would happen? Soot would get on their hands. How do you think he caught the person that was stealing from him?
You didn't touch the chicken.
They didn't touch the chicken. They were the only person that came out with clean hands.
That's
Have a good break, guys.